Ecce Homo, How One Becomes What One Is by Friedrich Nietzsche, quotes. Ecce Homo, How One Becomes What One Is by Friedrich Nietzsche is an autobiographical work in which Nietzsche attempts to explain himself, his philosophies, and his profound contributions to the intellectual world. With characteristic boldness, Nietzsche narrates his life's journey, shedding light on the various stages of his thinking and the intentions behind his writings. The title, referencing Pontius Pilate's famous proclamation, suggests that Nietzsche sees himself as both a prophetic and misunderstood figure. He presents his works as transformative instruments meant to provoke readers into questioning their beliefs, addressing key themes such as individualism, the rejection of traditional morality, and the pursuit of greatness. Quote 1. The fortunateness of my existence, its uniqueness perhaps, lies in its fatality. To express it in the form of a riddle, as my father I have already died, as my mother I still live and grow old. Nietzsche reflects on his life by linking it to both life and death, symbolized by his parents. He sees himself as living in a dual state, both declining and growing, and this shapes his understanding of life. His father's early death and his own experience of vitality ebbing away at the same age form a riddle about his existence, which he describes as exceptional because of this duality. Quote 2. I undoubtedly knew all about shadows in those days. In the following winter, the first winter I spent in Genoa, that sweetening and spiritualization which is virtually inseparable from an extreme poverty of blood and muscle-produced daybreak. During a period of physical weakness and decline, Nietzsche finds a way to transform his suffering into intellectual clarity. He reflects on how, despite his illness, he managed to create the work Daybreak, a product of the heightened spiritual sensitivity that came from his physical struggles. His suffering leads to a kind of enlightenment, where his intellectual capabilities sharpen even as his body weakens. Quote 3. What does not kill him makes him stronger. In one of Nietzsche's most famous statements, he argues that hardship and suffering can be turned into sources of strength. This is not just a philosophical idea for him, but a personal truth derived from his own experiences with illness and adversity. He believes that instead of being defeated by challenges, individuals can grow stronger through them, shaping their resilience and vitality. Quote 4. I am a pure-blooded Polish nobleman, in whom there is no drop of bad blood, least of all German. Nietzsche emphasizes his Polish heritage, claiming it as a source of nobility and purity, in contrast to German lineage, which he dismisses. This reflects his pride in his ancestry, and his desire to distance himself from what he perceives as the mediocrity and pettiness associated with his German relatives, particularly his mother and sister. Quote 5. Higher natures have their origins infinitely farther back, and with them much had to be assembled, saved, and hoarded. The great individuals are the oldest. I don't understand it, but Julius Caesar could be my father, or Alexander, this Dionysus incarnate. Nietzsche expresses the idea that truly great individuals are connected to a deep ancient lineage, which transcends ordinary human connections. He identifies himself with historical figures like Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great, implying that his greatness comes from a long, noble heritage that goes far beyond his immediate family. This also ties into his self-identification with the god Dionysus, representing a life-affirming, creative force. Quote 6. It is only among decadents that pity is called a virtue. Nietzsche criticizes pity as a weakness, arguing that it is not a noble quality, but one found among those who are in decline, decadent. He believes that pity undermines strength and individualism, promoting a false sense of virtue that interferes with the natural order of life. For Nietzsche, strength comes from overcoming suffering, not from indulging in or encouraging the suffering of others through pity. Quote 7. Let anyone harm me in any way, I requite it. You may be sure of that. As soon as I can, I find an opportunity of expressing my thanks to the offender, occasionally even for the offense. Nietzsche reveals his unique approach to retaliation, where instead of responding with aggression, he chooses to repay offenses with acts of kindness or by requesting a favor from the offender. He sees this as a form of power and superiority, where he refuses to allow the offense to degrade him and instead turns it into an opportunity for a deeper understanding or a display of his own self-control and wisdom. Quote 8. Freedom from resentment. Enlightenment over resentment. Who knows the extent to which I ultimately owe thanks to my protracted sickness for this too? Nietzsche reflects on how his illness taught him to overcome resentment, a form of bitter resentment that poisons the soul. He suggests that sickness can lead to enlightenment by forcing individuals to confront and conquer negative emotions. In this case, illness becomes a teacher that helps Nietzsche develop the strength to reject resentment and bitterness, leading to a more enlightened and peaceful state of mind. Quote 9. Resentment is the forbidden in itself for the invalid, his evil, unfortunately also his most natural inclination. Here, Nietzsche explains that resentment, or the feeling of powerlessness and hatred, is a particular danger for those who are weak or sick. While it is the most natural reaction to their condition, it is also the most harmful. For Nietzsche, overcoming resentment is essential for regaining strength and vitality, and he warns that indulging in it only accelerates physical and spiritual decay. Quote 10. To accept oneself as a fate, not to desire oneself different. In such conditions, this is great rationality itself. Nietzsche emphasizes the importance of self-acceptance, especially in difficult circumstances. He argues that true wisdom lies in embracing one's fate, rather than wishing to be different or to change the unchangeable. This acceptance allows for a rational and composed life, where one no longer fights against the inevitable, but learns to live in harmony with it. Quote 11. To attack is among my instincts. To be able to be an enemy, that perhaps presupposes a strong nature. Nietzsche declares that conflict and aggression are inherent to his nature. He believes that being capable of enmity and opposition is a sign of strength. For him, a strong nature thrives on resistance and opposition, seeing them as opportunities for growth and mastery, while weakness resorts to vengefulness and bitterness. Quote 12. He who has eyes for colors will call it diamond. In this quote, Nietzsche speaks of his deep sensitivity and appreciation for purity and cleanliness, particularly in a psychological and spiritual sense. He refers to this heightened sensitivity as being able to perceive clarity and brilliance in life, likening it to a diamond. His metaphor implies that true purity, in thought and being, shines with an unparalleled brilliance to those who are perceptive enough to recognize it. Quote 13. My humanity consists not in feeling for and with man, but in enduring that I do feel for and with him. My humanity is a continual self-overcoming. Nietzsche reflects on his relationship with humanity, describing it as a constant struggle to endure the emotions he feels for others. His form of humanity is not about sympathy or connection, but about overcoming the emotional burden that human interactions place upon him. This self-overcoming is an essential part of his philosophy, where personal strength and mastery are achieved through the constant effort to rise above weaknesses, including those induced by empathy. Quote 14. I have never reflected on questions that are none. I have not squandered myself. Nietzsche starts by explaining his cleverness through his focus on meaningful inquiries. He emphasizes that his intelligence stems from his refusal to waste time on trivial matters, like religious or moral dilemmas that many others grapple with. His clarity of thought, as he suggests, comes from prioritizing the essential and avoiding distractions that would lead to squandering his intellectual energy. Quote 15. God is a crude answer, a piece of indelicacy against us thinkers, fundamentally even a crude prohibition to us. You shall not think. Nietzsche criticizes the concept of God as an unsophisticated and intellectually stifling answer to the complexities of existence. He sees belief in God as a barrier to thought and philosophical inquiry, a simplistic and offensive solution for those who are serious thinkers. Nietzsche values the freedom to question and explore, rather than accept predetermined answers. Quote 16. What has hitherto been the greatest objection to existence? God. Here Nietzsche boldly claims that the concept of God has been the most significant obstacle to understanding life and existence. For him, belief in God overshadows the beauty and complexity of life by imposing a false framework of meaning. He argues that God, as an idea, negates the very essence of existence by offering a reductive, limiting explanation for it. Quote 17. All prejudices come from the intestines. Nietzsche humorously links physical well-being to mental clarity, suggesting that many intellectual prejudices are rooted in poor digestion and physical malaise. He implies that physical health has a direct influence on the ability to think clearly and avoid narrow-mindedness. For Nietzsche, both the body and mind must be in balance to achieve true intellectual freedom. Quote 18. The highest conception of the lyric poet was given me by Heinrich Heine. I seek in vain in all the realms of millennia for an equally sweet and passionate music. Nietzsche praises Heinrich Heine as the pinnacle of lyric poetry, recognizing in his work a unique combination of beauty, passion, and subtlety. Heine's mastery of language and emotional depth set him apart for Nietzsche, who admires Heine's ability to blend the divine with the mischievous, creating a form of art that is both profound and playful. Quote 19. I prefer this generation even to their great teachers, who have all been ruined by German philosophy. Nietzsche expresses his preference for the contemporary French thinkers over their predecessors, lamenting that the earlier generation had been corrupted by German philosophy, particularly Hegel. He criticizes the way German philosophy has distorted the understanding of great individuals and historical periods, making a case for the superiority of French intellectual culture, which he views as more refined and insightful. Quote 20. I take it for a piece of good fortune of the first rank to have lived at the right time and to have lived precisely among Germans, so as to be ripe for this work. Nietzsche expresses his belief that it was a stroke of fortune to live during a period in which he could appreciate Wagner's genius. He views the timing and his immersion in German culture as crucial to his readiness to engage with Wagner's work. Despite his disdain for much of German culture, he acknowledges that being surrounded by it primed him to fully comprehend and benefit from Wagner's art. Quote 21. To become healthier, that is retrogression in the case of a nature such as Wagner. Here, Nietzsche suggests that for an artist like Wagner, returning to health meant moving backward. He sees Wagner's deepest, most revolutionary work, like Tristan, as coming from a state of sickness or extreme tension. Health, in this case, diminishes the creative intensity that Nietzsche values most in Wagner's art, implying that true greatness often requires suffering or imbalance. Quote 22. The instinct for self-defense has, in his case, become soft. Otherwise, he would defend himself against books. The scholar, a decadent. Nietzsche criticizes scholars for their over-reliance on books, arguing that their instinct for self-preservation has weakened. He describes how scholars have lost the ability to think independently, becoming reactive rather than proactive. For Nietzsche, the endless consumption of books leads to intellectual decay, where scholars merely respond to the thoughts of others without developing their own original ideas. Quote 23. That one becomes what one is presupposes that one does not have the remotest idea what one is. Nietzsche asserts that to truly become oneself, one must not prematurely seek self-understanding. He emphasizes that self-discovery comes through a process of gradual development, where the ultimate identity is revealed only after navigating through various life experiences and mistakes. This process, he believes, is essential for achieving one's full potential, and knowing oneself too early would hinder personal growth. Quote 24. The entire surface of consciousness is a surface, has to be kept clear of any of the great imperatives. In this quote, Nietzsche emphasizes that consciousness, which he views as a superficial layer of the self, should not be burdened with grand ideas or goals too early. He suggests that deep instincts work behind the scenes, organizing and preparing the individual for greatness. By keeping the conscious mind free of heavy imperatives, the deeper self can grow naturally and unhindered, eventually guiding the individual to their true purpose. Quote 25. My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be other than it is, not in the future, not in the past, not in all eternity. Nietzsche's philosophy of amor fati, the love of fate, captures his belief that greatness lies in fully embracing life as it is, without wishing for anything to be different. He stresses the importance of accepting and even loving the inevitabilities of life, both good and bad, as they shape a person's character and destiny. For Nietzsche, this acceptance is not merely passive endurance, but a deep, active love for all aspects of existence. Quote 26. I am one thing, my writings are another. Nietzsche begins by separating himself from his writings, suggesting that his personal identity is distinct from the works he produces. He acknowledges that his books may not be understood immediately, as they belong to a future time when people will fully grasp his teachings. His recognition that he is born posthumously highlights his awareness that his work will find its audience long after his own era. Quote 27. Some are born posthumously. Nietzsche embraces the idea that his true impact will not be felt during his lifetime. He suggests that his work is ahead of its time, and that only future generations will fully appreciate his contributions. This statement reflects his confidence in the lasting significance of his philosophy, even though it may not be recognized or understood in his present. Quote 28. Ultimately, no one can extract from things, books included, more than he already knows. Nietzsche argues that readers bring their own knowledge and experiences to any text, and their understanding is limited by these personal boundaries. A book can only reveal what the reader is already capable of grasping, and without the requisite experiences or insights, much of its message will go unnoticed. This notion underscores the difficulty in understanding Nietzsche's own works, which demand a depth of experience and intellectual rigor. Quote 29. What one has no access to through experience, one has no ear for. This quote emphasizes that true understanding comes from lived experience. Nietzsche believes that without experiencing certain realities or concepts firsthand, a person cannot fully comprehend or appreciate them. He uses this idea to explain why many people fail to understand his writings, as they lack the necessary experiential knowledge to hear the deeper truths he conveys. Quote 30. My triumph is precisely the opposite of Schopenhauer's. I say, non legere, non legere. Nietzsche contrasts his approach to recognition with that of Schopenhauer. While Schopenhauer desired to be widely read and understood, Nietzsche takes pride in being unread and unrecognized by the masses. His phrase, non legere, I am not read, I will not be read, reflects his belief that true value lies not in popularity, but in the quality and depth of understanding that a select few may achieve. Quote 31. I would not know how to say better to whom at bottom alone I speak than Zarathustra has said it. To whom alone does he want to narrate his riddle? Nietzsche clarifies that his writings are intended for a specific, rare type of person. Those who are bold, adventurous, and unafraid of confronting deep philosophical riddles. These individuals are not content with easy answers, but are drawn to mystery and complexity. Nietzsche speaks to this unique audience through Thus Spoke Zarathustra, aiming his profound ideas at those capable of understanding and embracing them. Quote 32. In order to be just to the birth of tragedy, 1872, one will have to forget a few things. Nietzsche opens by suggesting that to properly understand the birth of tragedy, readers must let go of prior assumptions, particularly its connection to Wagnerism. He acknowledges that the book gained attention partly for the wrong reasons, due to its application to Wagner's work. This misinterpretation overshadowed its deeper philosophical contributions, especially regarding Greek tragedy, and the tension between the Apollonian and Dionysian forces. Quote 33. Precisely tragedy is the proof that the Greeks were no pessimists. Nietzsche challenges the common belief, influenced by Schopenhauer, that the Greeks were pessimists. He sees Greek tragedy as evidence of their profound affirmation of life, even in the face of suffering and hardship. For Nietzsche, tragedy represents the Greeks' ability to embrace life's harshest realities with courage and artistry, overcoming pessimism through a celebration of existence. Quote 34. I was the first to see the real antithesis, the degenerated instinct which turns against life with subterranean vengefulness. Nietzsche takes pride in being the first to identify the true opposition between life-affirming instincts and those that seek to undermine life. He describes philosophies like Christianity, Schopenhauer's pessimism, and Platonic idealism as rooted in a vengeful rejection of life's complexities. This perspective represents a major breakthrough in Nietzsche's thought, marking his rejection of traditional moral systems that deny the fullness of existence. Quote 35. This ultimate, joyfulest, boundlessly exuberant yes to life is not only the highest insight, it is also the profoundest. Nietzsche celebrates the affirmation of life, even in its most difficult aspects, as the highest philosophical truth. For him, true wisdom involves embracing all of existence, including suffering and guilt, without reservation. This ultimate yes to life signifies an acceptance of reality in its entirety, and it stands in stark contrast to the life-denying tendencies of Christian morality and other nihilistic philosophies. Quote 36. Affirmation of life even in its strangest and sternest problems, the will to life rejoicing in its own inexhaustibility through the sacrifice of its highest types, that is what I called Dionysian. Nietzsche explains his concept of the Dionysian as the ultimate affirmation of life, where even destruction and suffering are embraced as necessary parts of existence. He contrasts this with Aristotelian ideas of catharsis, arguing that the Dionysian is not about purging negative emotions, but celebrating life's continual becoming. The Dionysian spirit finds joy in the eternal cycle of creation and destruction, expressing a radical acceptance of life in all its forms. Quote 37. A tremendous hope speaks out of this writing. I have in the end no reason whatever to renounce the hope for a Dionysian future of music. Nietzsche concludes with optimism for the future, envisioning a time when a new Dionysian spirit will emerge, particularly in art and music. He believes that this future will come after humanity has overcome 2 millennia of life-denying ideologies. For Nietzsche, the rebirth of tragedy and the Dionysian condition represent the possibility of a new cultural renaissance rooted in a profound affirmation of life. Quote 38. The 4 untimely essays are altogether warlike. They demonstrate that I was no Jack o' dreams, that I derive pleasure from drawing the sword. Nietzsche begins by describing his untimely essays as combative works, meant to confront and challenge the intellectual culture of his time. He presents himself as a warrior of ideas, unafraid to engage in polemics and attack the accepted norms of German culture, science, and society. His writings, far from being abstract or detached, are expressions of his aggressive stance against mediocrity and the complacency he sees around him. Quote 39. I had touched a victorious nation on its sore spot, that its victory was not a cultural event, but perhaps something quite different. In this quote, Nietzsche reflects on the impact of his first untimely essay, which criticized the German nation despite its military victory over France. He argues that Germany's military success does not reflect a cultural triumph, exposing the hollowness of its culture. By striking at this sore point, Nietzsche reveals the disconnect between political or military achievements and the true measure of cultural progress. Quote 40. In fact, it was a quite new kind of free-thinking which therewith first found expression. To the present day, there is nothing more foreign or unrelated to me than the entire European and American species of libres penseurs. Nietzsche differentiates his form of free-thinking from that of European and American liberals, whom he sees as shallow and misguided. He rejects their belief in ideals and progress, seeing them as ultimately just another version of moralism. Nietzsche's free-thinking is more radical, grounded in the rejection of moral systems and the embrace of life in its complexity, unbound by traditional values. Quote 41. What I really wanted to do in these essays was something quite other than to pursue psychology. A problem of education without its like, a new concept of self-discipline, self-defense to the point of harshness. A way to greatness and to world historical tasks demanded its first expression. Nietzsche clarifies that his goal in the untimely essays was not merely to analyze Schopenhauer and Wagner, but to propose a new way of educating and disciplining oneself. He advocates for a path to greatness that requires extreme self-control and a willingness to confront difficult truths. Through these essays, Nietzsche begins to outline his vision of personal development and cultural elevation. Quote 42. The essay Wagner in Bayreuth is a vision of my future. On the other hand, in Schopenhauer as educator, it is my innermost history, my evolution that is inscribed. Nietzsche reflects on two of his essays, describing Wagner in Bayreuth as a prophecy of his own future, and Schopenhauer as educator as a personal exploration of his intellectual development. He sees these works as deeply autobiographical, representing not just an analysis of Wagner and Schopenhauer, but a reflection of his own philosophical journey and the challenges he faced in reaching his current state of thought. Quote 43. It is my sagacity to have been many things and in many places so as to be able to become one person, so as to be able to attain one thing. Nietzsche expresses the wisdom he gained from experiencing various roles and perspectives throughout his life. By embracing different identities and intellectual pursuits, he believes he has forged a singular, unified self capable of achieving a profound understanding of existence. This ability to synthesize his diverse experiences into one cohesive philosophy is central to his conception of personal growth and greatness. Quote 44. Human, all too human, is the memorial of a crisis. It calls itself a book for free spirits. Almost every sentence in it is the expression of a victory. With this book, I liberated myself from that in my nature, which did not belong to me. Nietzsche introduces human, all too human, as a record of his personal crisis and transformation. He explains that the book signifies his liberation from ideals that were not truly his own. By distancing himself from idealism and embracing a more grounded perspective on human nature, Nietzsche sees this work as a victory, marking his emergence as a free spirit who has regained control over himself. Quote 45. One error after another is calmly laid on ice. The ideal is not refuted. It freezes. Here, for example, the genius freezes. On the next corner, the saint freezes. The hero freezes into a thick icicle. At last, faith, so-called conviction, freezes. Pity also grows considerably cooler. Almost everywhere, the thing in itself freezes. Nietzsche metaphorically describes how, in Human, all too human, he methodically dismantles various ideals and concepts such as genius, sainthood, and heroism. He suggests that these ideals are not aggressively attacked, but rather allowed to freeze and lose their significance. By cooling down emotions and concepts traditionally held in high regard, Nietzsche exposes their human, all too human origins and reduces their power. Quote 46. What then resolved itself within me was not merely a breach with Wagner. I sensed a total aberration of my instinct, of which the individual blunder, call it Wagner, or my professorship at Basel, was merely a sign. Nietzsche reflects on his growing disillusionment with Wagner and his professorship, realizing that these were symptoms of a deeper misalignment in his life. He acknowledges that his choices were not in harmony with his true instincts and sees this recognition as a turning point, prompting him to correct the course of his life and return to his authentic self. Quote 47. Sickness liberated me slowly. It spared me any kind of breach, any violent or offensive step. Nietzsche views his illness as a gradual process of liberation that allowed him to step away from the life he had been leading without causing conflict or severing ties abruptly. His sickness provided him with the space and time to reflect, rethink his direction, and ultimately rediscover himself. He credits this period of recovery with freeing him from obligations that had suppressed his true nature. Quote 48. I have never been so happy with myself as in the sickest and most painful periods of my life. One has only to look at Daybreak, or perhaps The Wanderer and His Shadow, to grasp what this return to myself was, a highest kind of recovery itself. Nietzsche recounts how, paradoxically, his most painful and sick periods were also the times when he felt most at peace with himself. These difficult experiences led to profound personal growth and self-discovery, which he immortalized in works like Daybreak and The Wanderer and His Shadow. For Nietzsche, this return to his authentic self was the ultimate recovery, far more important than physical healing. Quote 49. Human, all too human. This memorial of a rigorous self-discipline with which I made a sudden end of every sort of higher swindle, idealism, beautiful feelings, and other woman-ishnesses that I had been infected with, was written chiefly in Sorrento. Nietzsche describes human, all too human, as the product of rigorous self-discipline, in which he decisively rejected all forms of idealism and sentimentality. He refers to these rejected notions as higher swindle and woman-ishnesses, signaling his determination to move beyond emotional and idealistic illusions. This shift in perspective was achieved during his time in Sorrento, marking a significant change in his philosophical outlook. Quote 50. With this book begins my campaign against morality. Nietzsche introduces Daybreak as the start of his philosophical critique of traditional morality. He clarifies that the book does not attack morality with hostility or aggression, but rather with subtlety and reflection. Through this work, Nietzsche aims to lead readers away from conventional moral values, not through direct opposition, but by offering a new perspective that challenges the fundamental assumptions of what has been considered moral. Quote 51. There are so many daybreaks that have not yet dawned. This metaphor serves as a hopeful vision for Nietzsche's philosophical project. He suggests that there are countless new possibilities and ways of thinking that have not yet been explored. Through his critique of morality, Nietzsche aims to inspire these new dawns, offering an alternative to the moral systems that have dominated human thought. It reflects his optimism in the potential for intellectual and cultural renewal. Quote 52. This affirmative book pours its light, its love, its tenderness upon nothing but evil things. It restores to them their soul, the good conscience, the exalted right and privilege to exist. Nietzsche explains that Daybreak is an affirmative work, shining a positive light on what has traditionally been considered evil. He argues that his book gives back dignity and legitimacy to ideas and behaviors that have been condemned by moral authorities. Nietzsche does not seek to destroy morality outright, but to offer an alternative view that affirms life, including its darker aspects, and rejects moral condemnation. Quote 53. The question of the origin of moral values is therefore for me a question of the first rank because it conditions the future of mankind. Nietzsche emphasizes the importance of understanding the origins of moral values as they shape the future of humanity. He believes that the moral systems humanity has inherited are not natural or divine, but are shaped by historical forces that have promoted decay and weakness. By questioning these values, Nietzsche aims to free humanity from their grip and open the door to a stronger, more life-affirming future. Quote 54. The priest wants precisely the degeneration of the whole, of mankind. That is why he conserves the degenerate part. At this price, he dominates mankind. Nietzsche criticizes the role of religious figures, particularly priests, in promoting what he sees as the degeneration of humanity. He argues that priests maintain control over society by preserving and nurturing weakness and decay. Through concepts like selflessness and the soul, they encourage people to deny their natural instincts, weakening them and ensuring the dominance of religious and moral authorities. Quote 55, "With daybreak, I first took up the struggle against the morality of unselfing." Nietzsche concludes by stating that daybreak marks the beginning of his battle against the moral concept of selflessness. He believes that the glorification of self-denial has led to the decay of human vitality and strength. Through this work, Nietzsche seeks to challenge the morality that prizes self-sacrifice and denial, advocating instead for a philosophy that affirms individual instincts and the will to power. Quote 56. Daybreak is an affirmative book, profound but bright and benevolent. The same applies once again and in the highest degree to the Gaia Scienza. In practically every sentence of this book, profundity and exuberance go hand in hand. Nietzsche emphasizes the tone of the gay science, comparing it to daybreak, but describing it as even more filled with joy and depth. He highlights the balance of profound philosophical insight and a sense of exuberance, creating a work that reflects both intellectual seriousness and a celebration of life. This joyful spirit, combined with deep thought, sets the mood for the book's exploration of human experience. Quote 57. "You who with your spear of fire melt the river of my soul, so that, freed from ice, it rushes toward the ocean of its goal." In this poetic excerpt, Nietzsche describes a transformative experience where the warmth of life, symbolized by the spear of fire, thaws the frozen soul and releases it toward its purpose. This metaphor suggests that life's energies, once liberated from stagnation or constraint, move freely and powerfully toward fulfillment. The imagery captures Nietzsche's vision of life as a dynamic, flowing force that seeks its own path. Quote 58. "Brighter still and still more healthy, free in most desired constraint. Thus your miracle it praises, January. Lovely saint." Nietzsche continues the metaphor of transformation, praising the clarity and vitality that emerge from embracing life's constraints. The January figure symbolizes renewal and health, marking a period where discipline and freedom coexist. This paradox of finding freedom within constraints is a key theme in Nietzsche's philosophy, where embracing life's limitations can lead to a greater sense of purpose and vitality. Quote 59. Songs of Prince Vogelfrey, composed for the most part in Sicily, call to mind quite explicitly the Provençal concept of Gaia Scienza, that union of minstrel, knight, and free spirit. Nietzsche refers to the songs of Prince Vogelfrey as capturing the spirit of the Provençal tradition, which combines artistry, chivalry, and intellectual freedom. This fusion of creativity and independence is central to the concept of the gay science, where Nietzsche celebrates a life of exploration, free thought, and artistic expression. The Provençal culture represents an ideal of joyful living and intellectual liberation. Quote 60. The last poem of all especially, To the Mistral, an exuberant dance song in which, if I may say so, I dance right over morality, is a perfect Provençalism. In this final poem, Nietzsche describes a joyous dance over morality, reflecting his rejection of traditional moral values. This exuberant celebration of life beyond conventional moral constraints embodies the spirit of the gay science. Nietzsche connects this freedom from moral boundaries with the Provençal culture's joyful, liberated way of living, capturing his own philosophical vision of embracing life without the weight of imposed values. Quote 61. The basic conception of the work, the idea of eternal recurrence, the highest formula of affirmation that can possibly be attained, belongs to the August of the year 1881. Nietzsche explains that the foundational concept of "Thus spoke Zarathustra," the idea of eternal recurrence, came to him in 1881. This idea represents the ultimate form of life affirmation, where one fully accepts and embraces the eternal return of all events in life, with neither regret nor avoidance. Nietzsche sees this as the highest expression of embracing life without reservation. Quote 62. It was during this winter, and under these unfavorable conditions, that my Zarathustra came into existence. Nietzsche reflects on the difficult circumstances under which he wrote Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Despite poor health and harsh conditions, the work came to life during this challenging time. This illustrates Nietzsche's belief that great achievements often arise in spite of adversity, and his personal struggles did not prevent him from producing this significant philosophical work. Quote 63. To understand this type, one has first to become clear as to its physiological presupposition. It is that which I call great health. Nietzsche emphasizes that to understand Zarathustra, one must grasp the concept of great health. This is not merely physical well-being, but a profound, resilient state of being that allows one to engage deeply with life, constantly overcoming challenges and renewing oneself. Zarathustra embodies this vitality and strength, which Nietzsche sees as essential for living a truly fulfilling life. Quote 64. He needs one thing before all else, great health. A health such as one does not merely have, but has continually to win, because one has again and again to sacrifice it. Here, Nietzsche expands on the idea of great health, describing it as something that must be continually earned through struggle and sacrifice. This kind of health is not static, but dynamic, requiring constant effort and renewal. For Nietzsche, this ongoing pursuit of health mirrors the larger philosophical journey of self-overcoming and growth, where one must continually push beyond comfort to achieve greatness. Quote 65. An ecstasy whose tremendous tension sometimes discharges itself in a flood of tears, while one's steps now involuntarily rush along, now involuntarily lag. Nietzsche describes the experience of inspiration as a state of overwhelming intensity, where the individual becomes a vessel for powerful forces. This state of creative ecstasy is marked by both physical and emotional extremes, where ideas and images flow involuntarily, and the person feels as if they are being guided by something beyond themselves. Nietzsche captures the awe and intensity of the creative process, which he experiences as a kind of revelation. Quote 66. One pays dearly for being immortal. One has to die several times while alive. In this metaphorical statement, Nietzsche suggests that achieving greatness or immortality through one's work comes at a significant personal cost. The process of creating something monumental often involves intense suffering and transformation, where the individual must endure many metaphorical deaths, experiences of profound change, isolation, and loss, before emerging with something enduring. Nietzsche reflects on the heavy price of genius and the solitude that often accompanies it. Quote 67. This work stands altogether alone. Let us leave the poets aside. Perhaps nothing at all has ever been done out of a like superfluity of strength. Nietzsche begins by setting Thus Spoke Zarathustra apart from all other works, asserting its uniqueness and its origin in an abundance of strength and creative energy. He suggests that no other poet or writer has produced something with this level of power and passion. The work emerges from a place of deep vitality, placing it in a category of its own, far beyond conventional literary efforts. Quote 68. Zarathustra has an eternal right to say, I form circles and holy boundaries around myself. Fewer and fewer climb with me upon higher and higher mountains. I build a mountain range out of holier and holier mountains. Nietzsche portrays Zarathustra as a figure who continuously elevates himself, drawing smaller circles around himself as fewer people are able to follow him to higher levels of spiritual and intellectual insight. Zarathustra builds metaphorical mountains that represent increasingly sacred and profound ideas. Distancing himself from the masses and isolating himself in his pursuit of truth and greatness. Quote 69. He contradicts with every word, this most affirmative of all spirits. All opposites are in him bound together into a new unity. Here, Nietzsche explains that Zarathustra embodies the ultimate contradiction. He is the most affirmative spirit, yet he contradicts everything. Zarathustra unites opposites, creating a new harmony from forces that seem to be in conflict. This ability to embrace and reconcile contradictions is central to Zarathustra's greatness, as he goes beyond the limitations of conventional thought and morality. Quote 70. The soul which possesses the longest ladder and can descend the deepest, the most spacious soul, which can run and stray and roam the farthest into itself. Nietzsche describes Zarathustra's soul as one that can both ascend to great heights and descend to profound depths. It is vast, capable of exploring the furthest reaches of itself and the human condition. This expansive and exploratory nature of Zarathustra's soul allows him to understand and integrate all aspects of existence, making him a unique and transcendent figure. Quote 71. The soul that loves itself the most, in which all things have their current and countercurrent and ebb and flow. Nietzsche portrays Zarathustra's soul as one that is deeply in love with itself, embodying a balance of forces that move in harmony, like the ebb and flow of tides. This self-love is not selfishness, but a recognition of the soul's immense capacity and potential. Zarathustra's soul encompasses all contradictions and currents, finding equilibrium within itself and radiating strength and wisdom. Quote 72. To redeem the past and to transform every it was into an I wanted it thus. That alone would I call redemption. Nietzsche presents Zarathustra's idea of redemption as the ability to fully embrace the past, transforming it into something that was willed rather than regretted. This radical acceptance of everything that has happened, affirming that it was desired, represents the ultimate act of freedom and responsibility. Zarathustra's concept of redemption is not about forgiveness or erasure, but about owning one's past as part of a continuous process of self-creation. Quote 73. The task for the immediately following years was as clear as it could be. Now that the affirmative part of my task was done, it was the turn of the denying, the no-saying and no-doing part, the revaluation of existing values themselves, the Great War, the evocation of a day of decision. Nietzsche explains that after completing the affirmative portion of his philosophical work, the next phase was to engage in the critical task of rejecting and deconstructing existing values. This no-saying marks the beginning of his revaluation of all values, which he sees as a necessary conflict, a great war against the moral and philosophical systems that have shaped human thought. His aim is to bring about a moment of decision where these traditional values are challenged and reevaluated. Quote 74. This book, 1886, is in all essentials a critique of modernity, the modern sciences, the modern arts, not even excluding modern politics, together with signposts to an antithetical type who is as little modern as possible, a noble and affirmative type. Nietzsche describes Beyond Good and Evil as a critique of modern civilization in all its forms, from science to politics. He contrasts this modern world with a noble and affirmative type of individual, someone who stands apart from the weaknesses and contradictions of modernity. This figure embodies strength, vitality, and a rejection of the mediocrity and passivity that Nietzsche associates with contemporary society. Quote 75. All the things of which the age is proud are felt as contradictions of this type, almost as bad manners, for example, its celebrated objectivity, its sympathy with all that suffers, its historical sense, with its subjection to the taste of others. Nietzsche criticizes the values that modern society prides itself on, such as objectivity, sympathy for suffering, and historical awareness. He sees these values as contradictions to the noble, affirmative type of individual he advocates for. To Nietzsche, these celebrated qualities represent a form of weakness or submission, where individuals conform to external standards and lose their ability to assert their own strength and individuality. Quote 76. The eye grown through a tremendous compulsion accustomed to seeing afar, Zarathustra is more far-sighted even than the Tsar, is here constrained to focus sharply on what is close at hand, the age, what is around us. Nietzsche contrasts the expansive visionary scope of Thus Spoke Zarathustra with the more focused, critical perspective of Beyond Good and Evil. While Zarathustra looks far into the future and explores deeper philosophical questions, Beyond Good and Evil turns its attention to the present moment, examining and critiquing the values and assumptions of modernity. This shift in focus reflects Nietzsche's need to address contemporary issues directly after the more prophetic work of Zarathustra. Quote 77. Psychology is employed with an avowed harshness and cruelty. There is not a single good-natured word in the entire book. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche intentionally uses a harsh and unsentimental form of psychology to critique modern values and individuals. The book's tone is deliberately devoid of kindness or leniency, reflecting Nietzsche's belief that a radical revaluation of values requires a sharp, uncompromising approach. This harshness is part of his effort to break through comforting illusions and expose the deeper truths about human nature and society. Quote 78. Speaking theologically, pay heed, for I rarely speak as a theologian. It was God himself who at the end of his labor lay down as a serpent under the tree of knowledge. It was thus he recuperated from being God. Nietzsche uses a theological metaphor to explain the necessity of rest and recovery after great exertion. He imagines God, after creating the world, lying down as a serpent under the tree of knowledge to recuperate from the overwhelming task of creation. This metaphor reflects Nietzsche's own need for recuperation after the immense creative effort of Zarathustra, and suggests that even the greatest forces, like God, must take a break from their labors. Quote 79. The three essays of which this genealogy consists are in regard to expression, intention, and art of surprise, perhaps the uncanniest things that have ever been written. Nietzsche introduces the genealogy of morals as a work marked by a disturbing and unexpected style. He highlights the deliberate use of surprise, building tension through its progression and leading the reader toward unsettling truths. He positions the essays as something unique, unsettling, and radically different from traditional philosophical writings, with each piece uncovering hidden and uncomfortable realities about human values. Quote 80. The truth of the first essay is the psychology of Christianity. The birth of Christianity out of the spirit of resentment, not, as is no doubt believed, out of the spirit. Essentially, a counter-movement, the great revolt against the domination of noble values. Nietzsche explains the central argument of the first essay, which examines the origins of Christianity. He claims that Christianity was not born from a lofty spiritual ideal, but rather from resentiment, an emotion of deep-seated resentment and envy. For Nietzsche, Christianity represents a revolt against the noble, life-affirming values of the strong, replacing them with a morality rooted in weakness and revenge. Quote 81. The second essay gives the psychology of the conscience. It is not, as is no doubt believed, the voice of God in man. It is the instinct of cruelty turned backwards after it can no longer discharge itself outwards. Nietzsche offers a radical interpretation of the human conscience in the second essay, arguing that it is not the divine voice of God within man, as traditionally believed, but rather the result of repressed cruelty. When people are unable to express their cruelty externally, it turns inward, manifesting as guilt and self-punishment. Nietzsche's view challenges the traditional moral understanding of the conscience as something inherently virtuous. Quote 82. The third essay gives the answer to the question where the tremendous power of the ascetic ideal, the priestly ideal, comes from. Although it is the harmful ideal, par excellence, a will to the end, a decadence ideal. In the third essay, Nietzsche addresses the ascetic ideal, particularly in relation to the priestly class. He argues that this ideal, characterized by self-denial and rejection of worldly pleasures, is not rooted in divine power, but is instead a harmful, decadent force. Despite its detrimental effects, the ascetic ideal has gained power because it has had no serious competitors throughout history, offering an illusion of meaning and purpose in a world that lacks alternatives. Quote 83. For man will rather will nothingness than not will. Nietzsche expresses a key insight about human nature. People would rather embrace nihilism or self-destruction than live without any sense of will or purpose. This tendency is part of why the ascetic ideal has maintained its power. Even in its negativity, it offers a framework of will and direction. Nietzsche critiques this preference for willing nothingness over living without a clear objective, highlighting humanity's existential need for purpose, even at a great cost. Quote 84. 3 decisive preliminary studies of a psychologist for a revaluation of all values. This book contains the first psychology of the priest. Nietzsche frames the genealogy of morals as foundational psychological work for his larger project of re-evaluating all values. He presents the essays as critical studies that dissect the origins and consequences of moral concepts, especially as shaped by the priestly class. By revealing the psychological underpinnings of these ideals, Nietzsche seeks to prepare the way for a new understanding of values, free from the influence of religious and moral dogma. Quote 85. This writing of fewer than 150 pages, cheerful and fateful in tone, a demon which laughs, the work of so few days I hesitate to reveal their number, is the exception among books. There exists nothing more rich in substance, more independent, more overthrowing, more wicked. Nietzsche describes Twilight of the Idols as a unique and powerful book, written quickly, but with great intensity. He characterizes it as wicked and transformative, filled with substance and independence. The work is meant to challenge and overturn established beliefs, doing so with a playful yet destructive spirit, like a laughing demon. Nietzsche presents it as unlike any other book, rich in its mission to disrupt traditional truths. Quote 86. That which is called idol on the title page is quite simply that which has hitherto been called truth. Twilight of the Idols. In plain terms, the old truth is coming to an end. Nietzsche reveals that the idols referred to in the title are the long-established truths of human society. He sees his work as bringing about the twilight, or the end, of these old truths, signaling a radical shift in understanding. In Twilight of the Idols, Nietzsche aims to dismantle what has been revered as truth, clearing the way for new ways of thinking. Quote 87. A great wind blows among the trees, and everywhere fruits fall. Truths. There is the prodigality of an all-too-abundant autumn in it. One trips over truths, one even treads some to death. There are too many of them. Nietzsche uses the metaphor of an autumn harvest to describe the abundance of truths that his work reveals. Truths are falling like fruit from trees, so plentiful that people might even step on them without realizing their value. This imagery reflects Nietzsche's view that his work overflows with insight, offering a surplus of ideas and revelations, some of which may be overlooked or disregarded. Quote 88. Only I have the standard for truths in my hand, only I can decide. Nietzsche asserts his unique position as the one who holds the true measure of what is real and what is not. He believes that he alone possesses the ability to distinguish between false and genuine truths, setting himself apart from previous thinkers and those who have accepted conventional beliefs. This declaration underscores Nietzsche's confidence in his philosophical insights and his conviction that he is bringing forth a new understanding of truth. Quote 89. All obscure impulse is at an end. It is precisely the good man who has known least what was the right path. Nietzsche critiques the concept of the good man, arguing that those who have been traditionally considered moral or virtuous have actually been the most misguided in their understanding of life. He suggests that their actions and beliefs, driven by unclear or misguided impulses, have led them down the wrong path. For Nietzsche, true clarity and insight lie beyond conventional morality, and the so-called good man is often the most blind to the truth. Quote 90. On 30th of September, a great victory, seventh day, a god takes his leisure on the banks of the Po. In this passage, Nietzsche reflects on the completion of his work and compares his sense of achievement to divine rest. After finishing the final quarter of Twilight of the Idols, he likens his moment of triumph to a god resting on the seventh day, indicating both his satisfaction with the completion and the significance he places on his creation. The reference to the Po, a river in Italy, adds a personal and poetic touch to this moment of reflection. Quote 91. What is it I suffer from when I suffer from the destiny of music? From this, that music has been deprived of its world-transfiguring, affirmative character, that it is decadence music and no longer the flute of Dionysus. Nietzsche laments the state of music, feeling that it has lost its life-affirming and transformative power. He believes music has fallen into decadence, a state of decline, and no longer represents the joyous, creative spirit of Dionysus. This reflects Nietzsche's broader critique of modern culture, which he sees as losing touch with its vital, life-affirming roots. Quote 92. Without any doubt, the Germans are idealists. When I last visited Germany, I found German taste occupied in trying to accord Wagner and the trumpeter of Säckingen equal rights. Nietzsche mocks the German tendency to treat all cultural products with equal reverence, regardless of their artistic value. He sees this as a sign of German idealism, which, in his view, lacks discernment and critical taste. By equating high art, such as Wagner's music, with lesser works, Nietzsche suggests that the Germans fail to appreciate true artistic greatness. Quote 93. German historians have not only altogether lost the grand view for the course, for the values of culture, and are one and all buffoons of politics or of the church. They have even outlawed this grand view. Here, Nietzsche criticizes German historians for losing sight of the broader cultural and philosophical significance of history. He accuses them of reducing history to politics or religious concerns, failing to grasp the deeper values that drive human culture. Nietzsche believes that by doing so, these historians have abandoned the grand, noble vision that should guide historical understanding. Quote 94. Luther, that fatality of a monk, restored the church and, what is 1,000 times worse, Christianity, at the moment of its defeat. Christianity, that denial of the will to life, become religion. Nietzsche condemns Martin Luther for restoring Christianity just when it was on the verge of collapse. He views Christianity as a life-denying religion that opposes human vitality and strength, and he blames Luther for revitalizing its influence. In Nietzsche's eyes, this act of restoring Christianity set back the progress of life-affirming values in Europe. Quote 95. The Germans, with their wars of liberation, deprived Europe of the meaning, of the miracle of meaning of the existence of Napoleon. They thereby have on their conscience everything that followed, that exists today, this sickness and unreason the most inimical to culture there is, nationalism. Nietzsche argues that the German wars of liberation, which aimed to defeat Napoleon, deprived Europe of its chance for unification under a strong visionary leader. He sees Napoleon as a figure who could have forged a powerful and unified Europe, but the German resistance led to the rise of destructive nationalism, which Nietzsche views as a force that undermines culture and reason. Quote 96. The German spirit is my bad air. I find it hard to breathe in the proximity of this uncleanliness. In psychologists become instinct, which every word, every gesture of a German betrays. Nietzsche expresses his deep discomfort with the German spirit, which he associates with psychological uncleanliness. He criticizes the Germans for their lack of self-awareness and psychological depth, suggesting that their instincts and behaviors are coarse and misguided. This bad air makes it difficult for Nietzsche to engage with German culture, which he finds stifling and lacking in refinement. Quote 97. My whole life is the proof de rigueur of these propositions. I seek in it in vain for a single sign of tact, of delicatesse towards me. Nietzsche reflects on his life as evidence of the lack of tact and refinement he finds in German culture. He feels that his work and ideas have been met with indifference or misunderstanding, particularly by his German contemporaries. This lack of delicacy and appreciation has shaped Nietzsche's negative view of the German spirit, which he believes is incapable of recognizing true philosophical depth. Quote 98. I know my fate. One day there will be associated with my name the recollection of something frightful, of a crisis like no other before on earth, of the profoundest collision of conscience, of a decision evoked against everything that until then had been believed in, demanded, sanctified. I am not a man. I am dynamite. Nietzsche boldly declares that his name will be remembered for bringing about a revolutionary crisis in human thought, a moment when the core beliefs and values that had previously been held sacred will be overturned. He sees himself not merely as an individual, but as a force of destruction, likening himself to dynamite that will shatter the foundations of traditional values, especially those associated with morality and religion. Quote 99. Revaluation of all values. This is my formula for an act of supreme coming to oneself on the part of mankind, which in me has become flesh and genius. Nietzsche's mission is to initiate the revaluation of all values, a process through which humanity will finally awaken to its true potential. This revaluation will involve questioning and ultimately rejecting the moral and religious values that have dominated for millennia. Nietzsche sees this as an essential step in human evolution, and he presents himself as the embodiment of this transformative force, the genius who will lead the way. Quote 100. I know joy in destruction to a degree corresponding to my strength for destruction. In both I obey my Dionysian nature, which does not know how to separate no-doing from yes-saying. Nietzsche explains that his destructive power is inseparable from his capacity for creation. His Dionysian nature revels in both the joy of destruction and the affirmation of life, refusing to distinguish between tearing down old structures and building new ones. For Nietzsche, true creation requires the destruction of outdated values, and he takes pleasure in this necessary process of transformation. Quote 101. Zarathustra created this most fateful of errors, morality. Consequently, he must also be the first to recognize it. Nietzsche reveals that the character Zarathustra, whom he presents as the creator of morality, must also be the one to undo it. Zarathustra's insight into the destructive nature of traditional morality, its basis in falsehood and its opposition to life, positions him as the first to recognize the need for its overthrow. Through Zarathustra, Nietzsche portrays the journey of understanding that leads to the rejection of morality as a harmful construct. Quote 102. The condition for the existence of the good is the lie. Expressed differently, the desire not to see at any price what is the fundamental constitution of reality. Nietzsche argues that the concept of goodness is based on a fundamental lie, the refusal to acknowledge the true nature of reality. The good man, according to Nietzsche, denies the harshness and complexity of life, preferring a comforting but false vision of the world. This denial of reality is a lie that sustains the traditional moral framework, which Nietzsche seeks to expose and dismantle. Quote 103. The good cannot create. They are always the beginning of the end. They crucify him who writes new values on new law tables. They sacrifice the future to themselves. They crucify the whole human future. Nietzsche condemns those who are considered good, arguing that they are incapable of creation, and instead bring about the end of progress. He accuses the good of destroying those who seek to establish new values and create a better future, as they cling to their outdated moral systems. This betrayal of the future, in Nietzsche's view, is the ultimate crime of the so-called good. Quote 104. I am proud to possess this word, which sets me off against the whole of humanity. No one has yet felt Christian morality as beneath him. That requires a height, a far-sightedness, a hitherto altogether unheard-of psychological profundity and abysmalness. Nietzsche takes pride in identifying himself as an immoralist, a label that distinguishes him from the rest of humanity. He argues that no one before him has seen Christian morality for what it truly is, something beneath them, and that it takes an extraordinary level of psychological insight and depth to recognize its flaws. Nietzsche positions himself as the first to achieve this understanding and to challenge the moral norms that have long dominated human thought. Quote 105. The unmasking of Christian morality is an event without equal, a real catastrophe. He who exposes it is a force majeure, a destiny. He breaks the history of mankind into two parts. Nietzsche views the exposure of Christian morality as a world-shattering event, a catastrophe that will divide human history into a before and an after. He sees himself as the force behind this seismic shift, the one who will bring an end to the era of Christian morality and open the door to a new era of truth and life-affirming values. This unmasking will, in Nietzsche's view, fundamentally alter the course of human history. Quote 106. Dionysus against the crucified. In this powerful and succinct statement, Nietzsche encapsulates the central conflict of his philosophy, the life-affirming, creative, and joyful spirit of Dionysus in opposition to the life-denying, suffering-centered figure of Christ. Nietzsche aligns himself with Dionysus, representing vitality and the embrace of all aspects of life, and positions this worldview in direct opposition to Christianity, which he sees as a negation of life's potential. Ecce Homo, How One Becomes What One Is, by Friedrich Nietzsche, serves as both a summary of his life and an assertion of his philosophical identity. Throughout, Nietzsche emphasizes the importance of self-realization and the rejection of mediocrity imposed by society. He challenges the reader to rise above conventional values, to transform themselves, and to become what they are meant to be. By exploring his own writings and philosophies, Nietzsche paints a picture of a liberated, self-affirming individual who stands in stark contrast to the conformist norms of his time, urging others to embrace the transformative power of self-knowledge and strength.
Curious to dive into the mind of Friedrich Nietzsche? With StudyLab Pro's book GPT, it's possible. Ask questions, explore themes, and discover the depths of Ecce Homo, How One Becomes What One Is, in an entirely new way. Start your conversation now by clicking on our logo. And if you're hungry for more educational content, subscribe to our channel to keep discovering, learning, and growing. Want more than just videos? Click on our logo now to join us on our platform for multiple choice tests, in-depth content, and tools to help you ace your studies. Get started now.